Yes, what's going on, people? Welcome back to the channel. Hope you're doing well. It's fantastic to see you. Now, it's been 6 months since I got my hands on an XT4. I've used it in various conditions. I've used it for street photography, I've used it for the YouTube channel, and I also used it on my Scotland trip. A video is coming soon, I promise. On that trip, it got a little bit wet. So in this video, I will actually tell you how did the camera stand up to that type of abuse, and overall what I like about it, what I don't like about it, and just generally touch on the main points that people seem to either complain about or praise the camera about. Now, I did make a very detailed video when I first got my hands on it. It's about 6 months ago. I'll link in the description, so do check it out. Anything I don't mention in this video, I've probably covered it in that video. This is more of a follow-up. So, no further ado, let's get into the video. Now at this point you're wondering, why on earth are you at home again? You were outside a minute ago and now you're back in your living room. Well, this neatly brings me onto the first slight issue I've been having with the XT4. You see, if you leave the sound on automatic, so by that I mean the gain of how loud or quiet the camera is with regards to picking up sound for a microphone, if you leave that on automatic, usually it's fine. But if you're filming in a really windy condition, it kind of like creates this weird digital clipping noise, a bit like this. These little flippy ports on the side, the XT3 had a proper door. I thought they were going to let water in, but they didn't. And it is really off-putting. If you then switch over to manual and you set your gain manually on the sound, you don't really get that. And don't get me wrong, I've been using the proper microphone, I've got an NTG, I've got a proper windsock for it, I'm not setting the gain stupidly high on the mic, everything is set up properly, I'm not being an idiot. And it's not just me either. Thomas Heaton, like the landscape photography guy who uses an XT4 to film his videos, he's had the exact same issue that he spoke about the other week. So if you're a serious, videographer, filmmaker, etc., you will not be using auto sound anyway, so this is not really an issue for you. But if you're the type of person who just wants to leave it in auto, just to capture whatever it is that you're doing, rather than worry about the video settings, this is something to keep in mind. Is it a deal breaker? Not really, because if I know I'll be in a windy condition, I can try and do it manually, but it's just something to keep in mind because it can trip you up, like it tripped me up with this particular video, and made pretty much a lot of what I filmed outside useless, because having good sound is, in my opinion, more important than having good visuals. So, something to keep in mind, but it's not the biggest issue in the world. Now let's have a quick chat about build quality, and here I can actually give a very good opinion because literally 2 days ago I picked up a second XT4. So if you remember, I had an XT3 and an XT4. I tried with the XT3 because I needed 2 cameras with IBIS for making videos. And it gave me a really good insight into a 6-month heavily used camera and a brand new camera, which I'll get onto in a minute. So overall, I've only had one issue with the build quality of this camera, and that was the weather sealing, as I've mentioned at the start of the video. Basically, I got caught in this huge rainstorm in Scotland. Now, I'll be completely upfront. There is no way anyone in their right mind would subject a camera to that type of storm, okay? It was basically the same as standing in a shower, and any realistic gadget that is not completely waterproof will get water inside some way or another. However, the camera lasted for about a few minutes and then it completely shut down. And after it shut down, I put it in my bag, I took the battery out and I carried on the hike. I mean, I was completely drenched, as you could see. When the camera dried off, I put the battery back in, switched it on, and everything was back to normal. There was a lot of condensation, of course, but once the camera fully dried out, there was no issues. It's working back to how it should be. I sent it to Fujifilm just to get them to check it. I told them, look, it got wet. One thing I've noticed is the shutter button got a bit sticky when it got wet. So they've replaced the top plate. They've inspected the camera and they said, look, it shouldn't have switched itself off. It shouldn't have got water inside, even with that rain. So they've replaced the top cover, thinking that that could have been the issue. Now, I'll be honest, would I do that again? I don't know, I'll think about it. Certainly I will have some more protection, but I just didn't have anything at the time. And to this day, they couldn't find any issues. The camera works as it did when it was new, and I've not really had any side effects from getting it that wet and effectively the camera short-circuiting. So that's that out of the way. And on that note as well, before I move on, Fujifilm's customer service, I think, is the best. Like, I literally been very honest with them. They said, no, sorted the camera out. Even in these COVID times, they turned the camera around in like 2 days, which is incredible. So yeah, thank you very much for that. Now, as for the rest of the build quality, let's talk about the scratching of the camera. I've not dropped it, but I have thrown it into bags, scraped it on surfaces, etc. Overall, it's fine. There's not many scratches on the camera. There is a few wear marks, as you'd expect for a heavily used camera, but overall, nothing to complain about. The second thing are all the switches and the buttons, apart from the shutter button, which I believe got replaced. Everything is fine. It turns like new, it clicks like new, it presses like new, and comparing to the brand new XT4, there's no real difference. The only difference that I found between the new XT4 and the old one is the screen on the old one is a lot more loose with regards to twisting it and folding it. I quite like that actually, because having to do it on the new one is a lot more effort. So I do prefer it once it's sort of loosened up a bit. But in terms of the overall attachment of the screen, it doesn't feel like it's going to fall off any minute. It doesn't feel any more, let's say, rattly or loose in that regard. It's just turning it. In terms of the lens mount, that's where I found the biggest difference. I was surprised at how difficult, well not difficult, but how much more resistance there was putting lenses on the new XT4 versus the old XT4. The old XT4, you can quickly just throw a lens on one-handed now, whereas with the new XT4, there's a lot more effort and it's a two-handed operation to put a lens on. Now, going back to when the camera got wet, I was worried that the water would have got in through the ports on the side, through the new port covers. So if you remember, on the XT3 you had a proper door, whereas on the XT4 you've got these new flappy port covers, which I think are complete nonsense. But I swallowed my words on that one because they kept the water out. What did let the water in a little bit was actually the lens mount itself. It was the 16-55 on the camera, and when I took that off, when I got back in the car, there was a lot of water that got past the seal on the camera. So maybe what happened is because the lens mounting itself got a little bit worn and more loose, maybe the seal wasn't as tight. Now, they didn't say there was anything wrong with that, so I assume that's just part of the wearing in process, but it's something to keep in mind. Other than the things that I've mentioned, I have not had any reliability issues with the camera. I think it froze on me once or twice, which required just a battery reset. But overall, it has never corrupted the card, it has never corrupted a file, it has never done anything extremely strange. So yeah, I've not really had any reliability issues. So to summarize this particular section, overall I'm pleased with the build quality of the camera, and yeah, I mean, I can't imagine many people having any issues with this. Now let me quickly touch on ergonomics. Honestly, there's not much here because everything I've spoken about in the original video still rings true. So let's start with the overall size of the camera. It is a bit bigger than the XT3. When you look at them side by side in the pictures, it doesn't look that much bigger, but when you actually use the camera, have it around your neck, you do notice there is a bit of a difference. Now, personally, I prefer the slightly bigger, chunkier feel to the camera because it makes it easier to use with bigger lenses. Even with the smaller primes, it just feels like a nice, firm grip. With regards to button placement, I still think this is one of the best laid out cameras that you can buy. It has everything for everyone. If you want to use the top dials, you can. If you want to use other dials, you can. The movie and the video dial, like the dedicated one, is fantastic if you're doing both. You can literally go from recording a video to taking pictures in a second, and I can't think of many other cameras that do that. The AF on button that's been moved is also in a much better place in my opinion. So overall, ergonomically, I think this is one of the nicest cameras out there, and there's not really much that I would change. Now, if you're thinking, well, what about the screen? We'll talk about that in a minute. To me personally, when I first got the screen or this camera, I wasn't sure, okay? But as I've used it more and more in different scenarios, I actually prefer this to what's on the XT3 now for various reasons. The obvious reason for someone that does both YouTube and photography, having the option to frame myself is a godsend. That means I don't need external monitors, I don't need to like take a picture, run around the back, see what it looks like, etc. It saves a ton of time. Also, there were some genuine photo scenarios where this screen came in really useful because I could just tilt it in a certain way. I think I remember I had my arm through a railing and my camera like there, and I could just tilt the screen and see what I was doing, whereas with the XT3 I physically couldn't do that. Now, some people will hate it because it'll say, well, it sticks out like a sore thumb, and it does. It's just something that you just have to get used to. So, I've got nothing else to say. A practical thing I can say about the screen is that it hasn't fallen off. It hasn't got any more wobbly. Obviously, it's looser than it's on the brand new camera, but I've already covered that. And I don't feel like I'm going to knock it off anytime soon. I'll probably do it tomorrow, knowing my luck. So overall, the screen is good. I like it. Some people won't, but you know, it's one of those. Now let's have a chat about IBIS. So this I was always unsure about. Now when I first got the camera, it seemed okay with the basic testing that I've done. As I started to use it more and more, I started to notice a few little issues with the IBIS, especially if you're introducing camera movements. If you were panning, there'll always be like a delay between you starting the pan and the pan starting on the camera, because I guess initially the IBIS was trying to fight it. Also, I found a few little jerky movements with the sensor, similar to the XH1 back in the day, but not as severe. I think a lot of other people had these issues, and then they released an update to the IBIS. I think it was 1.03 top of my head. That removed a lot of the issues. However, you do still get a bit of that IBIS jerkiness if you're moving around. If you're walking, you will get a degree of sensor bouncing around. It's one of those, it is what it is. Now, with some lenses, it is better than others. In my experience, I found the 8-16 and the 16-55 to be the best lenses when it comes to IBIS performance, and I found the primes to be not as good. Now, if you're just hand holding, if you're just doing like a locked off held shot, the IBIS is really, really good. Now, I mean, I've got really shaky hands, and it removed almost all shake. Also, if you're in a car moving, overall it's okay. Only when you have a bump or something like that, and let's say you're doing that with a camera, only then it can sometimes look a bit unnatural. Now, my biggest issue with the IBIS is not the fact that it does it, it's the fact that it's quite unpredictable. So there were times when I would walk behind someone and film them, and it would look like a gimbal. As a matter of fact, when I showed the footage to someone at the Fuji store, they thought it was on a gimbal. Other times, it'll be a bit jerky. So I don't really know why that is. Maybe it's just the way I was doing it, and I walked a bit smoother. I don't know. However, would I take this camera without the IBIS? Absolutely not, because for handheld shots, for even slow pans, for even vlogging to a certain degree, I think it does a very good job. Now, if you want smooth, really smooth footage, you have to use a gimbal. This is not a gimbal, and this is not a GoPro. But overall, I think it actually does a decent job once you understand the limitations and the shortfalls of this IBIS system. The next thing people were complaining about was the autofocus performance, and this was one thing that was never really sure why people were complaining so much, because in my experience it's been absolutely fine. I've not had any real issues with the autofocus. Overall, the linear motor lenses, so your 16-55, your 8-16, they are going to be better at focusing than the smaller primes, and the camera will perform at its best. Saying that, right now I'm being filmed by the 16 1.4 with face tracking on, and I mean, I'm just looking in the mirror, and overall, it seems to be fine. I mean, I'll tell you what, let me record a quick video just to show you what I mean. So there we go, there I am. So, as you can see, it's not terrible, it's following my face fairly well. The only times where I found problems with this autofocus is if I was using, let's say, one of the prime lenses, like the 23 f2, and I was trying to focus on something in the distance, okay, maybe it's a building, it's a mountain, whatever. That's when you're in like Hunt City, because the camera's always trying to hunt. I don't know why, maybe it's that lens, maybe it's the fact that because it's in the distance, it's struggling to pick it out. It could be a combination of those things. However, overall, using the f2.8 zooms with face tracking, and even with this 61.4 with face tracking, I've not had any issues. I would say for video overall, looking at all of my previous footage, I would have about an 85-ish% autofocus success rate. With photography, this camera's fine. I've, again, not had any real issues with autofocus. I've never had any real hunting. And to be honest, every time where I've missed focus, it was because I used the wrong focus mode for the scene, or I just missed focus myself. So take that for what it is. And yeah, overall, you will not have any issues with the autofocus within reason. The battery life will be by far the quicker section of this video. It's fantastic. It's night and day difference from the previous generation batteries, the smaller ones. And whereas if I go out with the XT3 to do just photography, I would need 2 batteries with me. If I go out with the XT4, I do photography and I do 4K B-roll of me being out and about. I can get through most of the day on 1 battery, and I'll just need to change it at the end. So overall, the battery improvement is magnificent, and I've got nothing else to say. What's not so magnificent is the way this camera exposes in video when you're in full automatic. Let me explain. So if you're not using full manual exposure, and let's say you have the shutter speed locked off at 60, okay, because I'm filming in 30, and then you have auto ISO or auto aperture to sort out the exposure, it is so weird. Like, with aperture, it does it in steps, and apparently it's an inherent Fujifilm thing, where if it adjusts the exposure, you have these clear steps in the footage. Now, for the ISO side of stuff, they have released an update which was meant to smooth it out. It has smoothed it out to a degree, but it just changes its mind so frequently, and it's done it in the original video that I filmed for this video, where it would just keep changing the exposure, exposed for the sky, exposed for me, exposed for the tree, etc, etc, and it's very distracting. With, let's say, your iPhones or your GoPros, they seem to have that nailed, where the exposure changes are so so gradual, that you don't even notice them. Whereas with the XT4, all exposure changes, not only are they so frequent, but they're just so sudden and noticeable that it's really off-putting. So whenever I use auto exposure, I just kind of accept it. And it's just a bit frustrating. So I hope this is something that can just be improved with software in the future. But in my experience, I've just found that the overall auto exposure in video mode is not the most reliable that I've come across. Certainly not the smoothest that I've seen. Right, time to summarize the video. So, what do I think overall after 6 months of use? Am I happy? Well, obviously I'm happy because I just bought a second one. Do I recommend this camera? Yes, 100%. If you're doing both photo and video, this is probably one of the best hybrid cameras that you can get that offer a lot of features for the price and in one body. if you are going to be only doing photography, you have no interest in video, I would say get the XT3 because the prices of those cameras are now so good. It's like 800 quid or so. So definitely just get the XT3. If you're doing mainly video, I still recommend this camera, okay? There are certain auto features, such as the auto sound and the auto exposure, which could be improved. But if you're predominantly doing video and you're really into video, chances are you'll be setting them up manually anyway, so it's not going to impact you at all. So in terms of the image quality out of video, it's fantastic. I've covered image quality many times. It's outstanding. And if you have got the money, go for it. You know, it's definitely worth every penny in my opinion. I would, however, maybe wait until closer to Christmas when the sales come. Typically they come around that sort of time where you can get some money off, because at the moment it's still full price, I think. But that's it. I will not be making any more videos on this particular camera. This was just a follow-up to the original video that I made about it, just to share my experience with using this camera over the last 6 months. So if you have questions, let me know in the comments. If you liked it, give it a like. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please do consider subscribing for more camera photography, London, street photography, travel one day, maybe, related stuff. Thank you ever so much, and see you in the next video in a bit.